Is Christian Watson already the most valuable dynasty asset on the Packers? And who should you be buying from the Commanders this offseason? All that and more in this episode of Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode of Locked On Dynasty is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 6 players now, and if they score more or less than the Prize Pick projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on your first entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That is prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. She is Kate Magdziuk. Check her out on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. Kate, what's going on?
Not much, Marcus. I'm excited to continue our team review series. And we've got two really interesting teams that when I was researching for this episode, I didn't know what to make of my own findings. That's always like a surefire sign that these are interesting teams when
Yes.
it's difficult to actually pin the takeaway because there's a lot of things up in the air for both of these teams.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to continue our reviews today with the Green Bay Packers and the Washington Commanders. Let's start with Green Bay. Kate, I just straight up, is Christian Watson the most valuable dynasty asset from the Packers kind of coming out of the season?
Yeah. Probably in terms of total value, in terms of literal perceived value. I still think it's AJ Dillon, Marcus. I really do. Like in terms of my perceived value. Now, in terms of perceived value from like the dynasty community, 100%. I do think it's Christian Watson, but I honestly think Christian Watson in general, along with Aaron Rodgers and I mean the rest of that entire passing attack, kind of volatile. It was really just kind of a absolutely nauseating experience with Christian Watson. I said it when he came out. I thought Romeo Doubs was the more refined product. And I think we saw that a lot this year. We saw a lot of health concerns with Christian Watson. He was always banged up. It was one thing after another, not his fault. Obviously, injuries happen, but there was just a 4-game stretch this season, Marcus, where Christian Watson was actually viable for your fantasy teams. He probably led you to a playoff. Like,
Probably.
if you played him weeks 10 through 13 in that very specific 4-week window, he probably helped you out a lot. Otherwise, he did not crack the top 12 one other time this year, period. We saw it was largely due to touchdowns. So we know that touchdowns are so volatile. Can we trust it? He had 2 100-yard games, but also those games were supplemented by 3 2 and 1 touchdowns. So I don't know. I'm not sending all of my very expensive eggs into Christian Watson's basket right now.
Yeah, so on Dynasty League Football right now, you just look at the startup ADP. Christian Watson going off the board as the 44th player in startups again. The next player is actually AJ Dillon, as you mentioned, at 63, and Aaron Jones at 67. So Dynasty League players are telling you they believe it's a pretty big gap, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be a little bit concerned about making the jump with Christian Watson as wide receiver 22. Like you pointed out, for all those reasons, like very touchdown dependent. What's he going to look like if Aaron Rodgers isn't on this team? But man, Kate, the potential is just through the roof. And I think once we get to wide receiver 20, 21, that's when I start looking for upside. So I get it. I want to ask you, Who is the most disappointing player from this season for the Packers? Because I got a feeling it might be the same answer for you.
I'm trying to spread my grumpiness on this Thursday morning around a little bit. So I'm going to roll with Aaron Rodgers, especially with the fact that he's the object of a lot of conjecture right now in these trade rumors as they're heating up. Could he end up a New York Jet? Joe Namath has already given his blessing to unretire number 12, which obviously that was the only thing holding Aaron Rodgers back. But like I'm not I it's hard, right? Because a lot of Aaron Rodgers, game over the last 4 seasons has been built on efficiency, like absolute extreme efficiency. And we knew he probably wasn't going to have that same efficiency with Christian Watson, Romeo Dubs, Randall Cobb,
Yep.
a Robert Tunyon coming off of a torn ACL. Actual finish was QB 13, but I've talked about it before. Like the real Aaron Rodgers experience was god awful this year. Didn't once surpass 300 passing yards, highest interception rate since 2017. It had one game all season long with more than 2 touchdowns. Like there was not much to like. Didn't finish higher than QB7 all season long. And I think we were thinking maybe he'd be a value because that without
Sure.
Devontae Adams, that value for Aaron Rodgers was dipping. But no, when we can't bank on the efficiency, I'm not sure that we can bank on an Aaron Rodgers that can post fantasy points. Now, can he recoup some of that efficiency if he heads to the Jets and he's suddenly throwing to Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, like very much a possibility. But in terms of this year, I feel like Aaron Rodgers was more disappointing than anybody.
Yeah, I get it. Just because we know what the potential is. Like we saw him be a back-to-back MVP and we saw him, throw 40 touchdowns. And even though he's not giving you anything as a runner at this stage of his career, he can still be super efficient and just have the volume to be a guy that you want in your lineup every week. And we got to the point for most of the season where it's like, man, can you even rank him as a top 16 quarterback? Can he finish the final 8 games of the season without throwing for 240 or more yards in a game?
That's bad, Marcus. I hear that's bad. And
That's
they didn't. There were opportunities, right? There were some plus matchups that he should have taken advantage of, and we didn't see it. And that's kind of where I'm at now. Do you think this is a buy low opportunity for Aaron Rodgers? Maybe
no,
this.
no.
Okay.
I think Tom Brady has changed our thoughts on quarterbacks in a bad way, where we think every quarterback can play into their 40s and put up big numbers. We saw Drew Brees fall off at this stage of his career, basically become washed. We saw Ben Roethlisberger out of the league before he even got to his age 39 season. Phillip Rivers retired. I mean, most all these great quarterbacks are done by the age of 40. Why should we assume that Aaron Rodgers, who's had a lot of kind of nicks and bumps and bruises over his career, is going to continue to be, that quarterback that's elite into age 40, 41, 42? I don't see it. I think it's the opposite. I'd rather jump out now while he still has any kind of name value and just move on.
I think the time would be now then, while there is all this conjecture that he might be headed to New York. Now, speaking of the Knicks, let's just, before we close out this lovely Packers segment, do you think that maybe the thumb had anything to do with that lack of efficiency? Obviously, wasn't
Sure.
fully healthy. A injury in the thumb of your throwing hand has to do something for you, right? Even if he played through it, maybe
Yes.
that contributed to some of those interceptions that we saw.
Yes. I think you're right. I wouldn't be surprised if the thumb had a big part of it. The problem is when you're really only a pocket passer, this sounds bad, but like you don't have many other ways that you can win, right? Like if Jalen hurts his thumb, get it hurt. Okay. he can use a little bit more of his legs to kind of offset some of the accuracy problems that he might have. If Lamar Jackson bangs his hand, he can run the ball a little bit more. And that's just not the case with Rodgers. He relies so much on being accurate and having velocity that it's a big deal. So yeah, I'm out on Aaron Rodgers now going forward for the rest of eternity. Okay, I have a dynasty sell and a most disappointing player that I want to talk about in regards to the Packers. We're going to do that when we come back. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the absolute best sportsbook out there. And you should be using them now because the NFL playoffs are here. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's even better because they have so many great features that make betting on sports so easy and fun. Listen, if you are a new customer, you can join today and you can get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at fanduel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all of your favorite bets from the money line to point spreads to player props. Plus, you could even combine all your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlays. I like the 3-team teasers. It's always been one of my favorites, or 2-team teasers, maybe move the Bengals up to, I think it's even money line, like +7 this week. Get the 49ers at +9.5. That's the way I'd go. On and off app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet on a FanDuel and get $150 free in bets, win or lose, at fanduel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports book partner of the NFL. All right, Kate, I want to talk about A.J. Dillon because I think he was the most disappointing player for the Packers this year. He's also the player that I would be selling this offseason. I'm going to tell you why. Typically, historically, running backs break out in years 2 and 3, and from that point, they start to decline, right? There's a chance that we've already seen A.J. Dillon's peak, which was 2021 when he totaled 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. Kate, if I would have told you going into the year that A.J. Dillon was going to play all 17 games this year and he was going to have a less than 1,000 yards and the same amount of touchdowns that he had last year, you would have said that's a disappointment. And he wasn't able to earn more snaps from Aaron Jones, and he wasn't able to take over a bigger role in this offense. I just think with him going into the final year of his contract, he's going to be 25 this offseason, which is not old for a running back, but it's not necessarily young either. I think I'm getting out now while he still has, top 20 RB value, RB 19 in startup drafts right now.
See, I actually among, running backs in a similar tier, right? A.J. Dillon doesn't have a ton of touches on the tires. I know we talk about age, but I think a lot of that, factors into the fact that we see a lot of running backs get the bulk of their touches, before their age 25 season. They see a really heavy touch total in their rookie seasons or their rookie contracts. And then we kind of see it tail off as they start to decrease in efficiency, etc. But I don't really think that narrative applies to A.J. Dillon. Do you?
He did get a lot of work in college, but no, you're right in the NFL because right now he has 483 touches through 3 seasons, which is not a ton.
I mean, conversely, Derrick Henry had 382 touches just this season.
Right.
Josh Jacobs, almost 400 touches on his own. So, comparatively, I think there's plenty more to go around for A.J. Dillon. Now, again, it kind of goes back to that question of what does this team look like without Aaron Rodgers? It feels like we're planning for him not to be there.
Yep.
I just think that A.J. Dillon is a really special runner. And that's why I'm willing to buy in. I'm not buying into the age. Again, looking back at the touch total, I think
Does it concern you, Kate, that his yards per carry have dropped in each of the last 3 years?
Maybe it should.
The thing is, he is so talented. You're right. There's just not that many running backs that have his size, speed, and can somewhat catch the ball out of the backfield. But it comes back to this theme that I think we're going to have all off season long is that every running back in Dynasty is a sell this year. Like there's just not many guys. It's like, oh, I love that price tag because I'm looking at startup ADP right now. Christian Kirk and AJ Dillon have the same draft value. Like if I can get Christian Kirk for AJ Dillon, I'd probably do that.
Yeah.
Stop. Let's we'll save lots of AJ Dillon talk for this offseason because I can guarantee you we're gonna have plenty of discussions about him. Let's talk about the Commanders. Kate, who is the most valuable dynasty asset on the team? I think you and I both know this one, but we can be quick about it.
It's Terry McLaurin, right?
Yeah.
Again, Marcus, this comes back to this is one of those guys that I'm really kind of sick of being like, well, next year could be the year.
Well,
but Terry McLaurin just too talented.
Really quickly. Did you know that Terry McLaurin is not on startup drafts is not the highest value player for Washington?
I'm gonna guess it's Brian Robinson.
It's not Brian Robinson either.
What?
It's Jahan Dotson.
Wow. Huh. Okay.
That's what I saw that this morning when I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, that feels like a mistake. Like we like Jahan Dotson. He had a really good rookie season. But I can't get behind him being ranked ahead of the number one receiver on his own team, right?
No, and especially a receiver as talented. And I mean, for maybe some of the frustration, right? And a perceived lack of upside. We still had 4 games this season where Terry McLaurin surpassed the 100 receiving yard mark. Was able to score touchdowns, had 5 touchdowns on the year, never had fewer than 4 in any given season. He's just a pretty safe asset. Looking at his stats in comparison to the volatility that they've seen at the quarterback position, the ups, the down, it's not even like there's just been frequent changes at the quarterback position. They just haven't had any good quarterbacks, period. And yet,
well, they've also had changes, right? Like Carson Wentz started the year, and then it was to Taylor Heineke, and then Carson Wentz came back, and then it was to Sam Howell. They haven't had good quarterbacks, as you mentioned, but they've also cycled through a bunch of quarterbacks. So there's no chemistry at all. And yet, every year, what does Terry McLaurin do for us?
It's 1,000 receiving yards, baby.
1,000 receiving yards, 77 plus receptions. He's just good. That's all there is to it.
I feel like if I didn't tell you that this was his best career year in receiving yards, you wouldn't have realized it. Yeah. But again, in his 4 years in the NFL, never had fewer than 919 receiving yards. Just hit his peak, 1,191 receiving yards, 15.5 yards per reception. You're going to take that all day from a receiver in this kind of offense. Jahan Dotson might be the sexier pick right now, but I also don't know that there's any receiver that's just safer than Terry McLaurin. He had 4 games all season where he had fewer than 55 receiving yards. That's a really safe floor.
That's absolutely wild. Kate, I want to ask you about the one player that you're going to buy from this offense coming up. Maybe it's Terry McLaurin. Maybe it's Jahan Dotson. We'll get to that in just a second. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than the Prize Pick projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, men's college basketball, women's college basketball, soccer, WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball, cricket, and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They are currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada. Just download the Prize Pick app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That means if you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. You deposit $50, they'll give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, Kate, to close out the show, who's the one player that you're buying from this Washington offense?
All in on Terry McLaurin for all the reasons that we just mentioned, but I do want to shed light and give everybody a reminder that Terry McLaurin did sign a contract extension this year that is definitely going to keep him with the Commanders at least over the next 2 seasons, probably 3. There's just not a conceivable way with its structure that they're going to be able to move on from Terry McLaurin anytime soon based on the dead cap associated with his contract. There's a lot of dead money. If they were to move on from him this year, there's like $35 million in dead cap
No way.
next
And they don't
year.
want to. They shouldn't.
No, they shouldn't want to. But even if we're saying like blow up the franchise, if Dan Snyder's out and they just want a fresh start, like Terry McLaurin's going to be part of the fresh start. The floor is so low. I think the biggest concern, maybe from a dynasty perspective, that might be putting him, pushing him down that dynasty draft stock board. It might be the age. He's 27 years old. He's a little bit older. Came into the league a little bit older, but like, you know what? 27 years old for a wide receiver. He's still coming into his own. The floor is very safe. And I think we can all agree there's some upside there. So I'll still be buying Terry McLaurin.
So will I. I think that's a great call. I'll give you one more quickly before we leave. How about Dynasty Brown? Wide receiver, I think last time I looked, wide receiver 93 on Dynasty League football right now, which means he's probably sitting in your waivers or at the very bottom of somebody's bench. Seems like Sam Howell is going to get a chance to start next year. Just want to remind people that Dynasty Brown in 2 seasons with Sam Howell, 1,000 yards, 12 touchdowns, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, like averaged over 20 yards per reception with Sam Howell.
The connection's real.
Yeah, I know that this wide receiver depth chart's a little crowded with Terry McLaurin, wide receiver 1, apparently Jahan Dotson, Curtis Samuel, but going into year 3 with Dynasty Brown with his former college quarterback, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden he's a 600, 700-yard receiver this year.
That's serviceable. I'll take that in my wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 all day.
Sure. It costs you nothing. So a lot of good values on this Washington offense between Dynasty Brown, Terry McLaurin. And I think Antonio Gibson's a little bit of a buy if you want to take a shot on upside. Brian Robinson, maybe a decent play. Even Sam Howell, who you and I both like as a what the heck QB2 option next year. So go check in on those Commanders in your Dynasty leagues. That's it for today's show. Thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you loved, the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Magdziuk. Go check out her work at the Gaming Society. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We'll see you right back here tomorrow to talk a little Steelers-Lions on Friday. See you guys then.